Dear brothers and sisters, today I will show you a sermon of Bishop Robert Barron, which I think is one of the most powerful reflections on the cross you will ever hear. A message that flips our view of strength, power, and success upside down and reveals the poetry of Christianity's most shocking symbol. This short sermon went viral for a reason, and once you hear it, you'll understand why. Let's watch.
You know, friends, if somebody came from Jesus' time in a time machine to this place right now, and someone explained that this was a great cathedral and a religious ceremony was taking place, and they saw that symbol of a crucified man, they would think we had lost our minds. Because that image was the most frightening thing you could imagine in Jesus' time. Excruciating pain, ex cruce, from the cross. That was seen as the limit case of suffering. Cicero, the great Roman orator, one of the masters of the Latin language, was describing a crucifixion in a letter, and he had to use all sorts of indirect expressions and circumlocutions because to describe a crucifixion directly was seen as just too horrible. It's also why for the first many centuries of Christianity, nobody depicted Jesus on the cross. It was too fresh in the cultural memory of people. Why in the world an ancient person would think, would you have that symbol with victorious branches and banners on it? It'd be like coming to a place and seeing an image of a man hanging from a noose. Christianity turns on the wonderful poetry of the cross. What did they see in this sign? They saw all of human dysfunction placed on him, and we just heard it, didn't we? Go through the Passion reading. What do you hear? You hear of stupidity. You hear of hatred. You hear of cruelty. You hear of violence. You hear of institutional injustice. It's as though all the darkness of the world came upon him. And he swallows it up with that phrase, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." What they saw, the first Christians, in that sign was everything the world can throw at us, now conquered, now swallowed up in the ever greater divine mercy. And that's why Paul can say, I preach one thing, Christ and Him crucified. Trust me when I tell you, when people heard that, they thought Paul had lost his mind. That's what you're preaching, a crucified criminal? Are you crazy? But see, Paul had met the risen Christ. And he knew thereby that the love of God was more powerful than anything that is in the world. And you see now why, when the first Christians held up that cross, they were doing it as a kind of taunt. See, the Roman authorities said, if you cross us, pun intended, that's what we'll do to you. It was a sign of Roman power. It was a sign of the power of the sinful world. What the first Christians knew in light of the resurrection was that God's love had definitively broken that power. And so they taunted the world with the cross. You know, when Paul refers to Jesus as Lord, and he does it all the time in his writings, Jesus Kyrios, he says, Jesus the Lord. And we say, yeah, sure, that's a nice spiritual sentiment. In his time, those were fighting words. Because what people said at that time was, Kaiser Kyrios. That's how one Roman citizen might greet another. Kaiser Kyrios. It meant Caesar is the Lord. No, he's not, says Paul. Jesus Kyrios. Because someone whom Caesar put to death, God raised from the dead. And therefore, Jesus is the true Lord. How wonderful, by the way, we just heard it, didn't we? That Pontius Pilate, Caesar's local representative, places over the cross, meant to be a taunt of his own, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. What a joke. But the joke was on him, wasn't it? Because Pilate becomes thereby the first great evangelist. Now listen, what does the world today want us to do with the cross of Jesus? They want us to make it a little private symbol, a sign of our little hobby, Christianity. But that is repugnant to the Bible, because that sign is meant to be held up to all the world, announcing that there is in fact a new Lord, a new King. What did Jesus himself say? But when the Son of Man is lifted up, and he meant that on the cross, when the Son of Man is lifted up, he will draw all people to himself. Now, that's the work of the church. That's called evangelization, isn't it? The good news, by the way, euangelion in Greek, evangelization, well, that's a taunt as well. Because in ancient times, an evangelist was someone who went ahead with the good news that Caesar had won a victory. The first Christian is saying, no, just the opposite. God has won the great victory. And so today, and every day of the year, let us hold up the cross of the crucified Jesus as a challenge to the cruelty and violence, injustice and hatred of the world, as a sign that we know that the true Lord is Jesus.
I have to say, this might just be the most powerful, most theologically rich, and most deeply human reflection I've ever heard on the cross. Not just because of how well he speaks, but because of what he dares to say. In a time when even Christians are tempted to soften the edges of our faith, to turn the cross into a decorative symbol or a private badge of belief, Bishop Barron calls us back to its original scandal. He asks us to look again, not with sanitized eyes, but with the eyes of history and faith. And when we do, what we see is staggering. He begins with a profound and even uncomfortable thought experiment. Imagine someone from the first century walking into one of our churches and seeing a crucified man held up in honor. What would they think? They'd think we were mad. Because the cross in that time was not a religious icon, it was a tool of torture. It was state-sanctioned terror. No one painted crucifixions. No one wore them around their necks. It was too horrific, too raw. That image would have been associated with pain so unimaginable that even the ancient writers had to use indirect language to describe it. Bishop Barron helps us feel the weight of that moment. He doesn't let us romanticize it. He asks us to remember. The cross was designed to humiliate, to crush, to erase a person's dignity entirely. And that's what makes the early Christian claim so extraordinary. When they lifted up the cross, they weren't celebrating violence. They were declaring that God had taken the very worst the world could give, the injustice, the hatred, the cruelty, the power games, the fear, and he swallowed it. Not with revenge, not with divine wrath, but with mercy. Father, forgive them, Jesus says, they know not what they do. That moment, that single phrase, encapsulates the entire gospel. It's not just a man dying, it's the mercy of God breaking through human sin, overcoming evil not by force, but by love. Bishop Barron draws this out brilliantly. He doesn't reduce the cross to a metaphor or a historical footnote. He sees it for what it truly is, the center of Christian wisdom, a challenge to the modern world, a taunt even to the systems of domination that still try to rule through fear and intimidation. He reminds us that Paul, when he said, Christ and him crucified, was all he would preach, wasn't being poetic. He was being revolutionary, because that statement rejected everything the world saw as power. It said, God's love is stronger than Rome, stronger than death, stronger than shame. This is one of the reasons I find this sermon so moving. It's not just about theology, it's about courage. Bishop Barron reminds us that the cross isn't something to be privatized. It isn't just our personal comfort or a feel-good token of faith. It's a public proclamation, a message that dares to say there is a new king, and he rules from a tree, not a throne. The world, especially now, wants us to keep our beliefs quiet, harmless, tucked away. But the cross, as he says, is not harmless. It is confrontational. It speaks into the heart of every injustice, every abuse of power, every lie told in the name of progress. And it says, there is a better way. One of the most powerful parts of the sermon is when Bishop Barron talks about how the cross redefines strength and success. We live in a world that worships control followers, fame, status, efficiency. We equate success with climbing higher, making more, suffering less. But the cross shatters that illusion. It tells us that the greatest power is self-giving love. That the real victory is not avoiding pain, but transforming it. That being meek, being willing to lose for the sake of others, is not weakness, it's Christ-like courage. He also uses this beautiful phrase, the poetry of the cross. That stood out to me, because so much of life today is utilitarian. We value what works, what sells, what produces. But poetry interrupts that. It speaks truth in a different language. And the cross is God's poetry, God's way of saying that beauty can be born from agony, that hope can rise from horror, that life can come through death. We are invited to live not as machines of efficiency, but as people formed by grace, shaped by humility, animated by love. And that brings me to what I think is the most radical part of this entire message, the call to humility. The cross invites us to lay down our pride, to stop boasting in our own strength, and to see the Savior who was mocked, beaten, abandoned, and who rose again. It is a humility that silences all ego. Because what can we boast in when the Lord of the universe dies naked on a cross for us? What can we cling to when God himself lets go of everything? That kind of love breaks you. Not in a way that leaves you hopeless, but in a way that rebuilds you. It strips away the noise, the pretense, the masks we wear, and it invites us to be real, to be honest, to come close. Because if Jesus endured all of that for love of us, then our suffering too can be transformed. Nothing is wasted in the light of the cross. No pain is meaningless. No failure is final. And maybe that's why this sermon hit me so deeply. Because in a world filled with noise and slogans and superficial spirituality, here is a message that goes straight to the heart. The cross is not just a moment in history. It is the moment. It is the climax of the human story. It is where God met our worst and loved us anyway. So now I want to turn the question to you. You've just heard this sermon. You've just seen the way Bishop Barron breaks down the meaning of the cross. What did it stir in you? Do you see the cross the same way now? Do you see its power not as defeat, but as a divine paradox, victory through surrender, strength through weakness, glory through grace? I would love to hear your thoughts. Was there a line that struck you? A moment that challenged you? A truth that opened your eyes? Share it in the comments below. This is the kind of conversation we need more of. A conversation not about politics or performance, but about the deepest truth of our faith. Because as Bishop Barron said so powerfully, Christianity turns on the poetry of the cross. And when we begin to see that poetry for what it is, we don't just understand Jesus more, we begin to understand ourselves. And the world is never the same. What makes this message so powerful is that it forces us to see the cross not as a sanitized symbol, but as a contradiction that holds the deepest truth. Jesus didn't win by overpowering his enemies, he won by loving them to the end. That kind of love defies every instinct we have for self-preservation, for control, for revenge. And yet, that's what we're called into. We're not just invited to believe in the cross, we're invited to live it. And maybe that's the hardest part. To live the cross means to accept suffering, not as punishment, but as participation. It means to lay down pride, let go of our ego, and choose mercy over vengeance. Bishop Barron's reminder that the early Christians saw the cross as a taunt, not to provoke the world, but to declare a deeper truth, hit me hard. The world said Caesar is Lord, but they said no, Jesus is Lord. And their boldness wasn't just about words. It cost many of them their lives. Today, most of us won't face persecution for wearing a crucifix or going to church, but we attempted to water down what it means, to treat faith as a private comfort rather than a public witness. The world still wants the cross hidden, still wants Christianity to be quiet, polite, even ornamental. But as we've seen in this sermon, the cross is meant to be held high, not in pride, but in prophetic hope. It's a challenge to the darkness, to injustice, to the false powers that still reign. So now I want to ask you, honestly, from the heart, what did this message stir in you? Did it reshape how you see the cross? Did it make you think differently about pain, humility, or even victory? What part of Bishop Barron's sermon stayed with you after the final words? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Let this be more than just a video. Let it be a conversation. Your perspective could be the encouragement or insight someone else needs right now. Thank you for being here, and as always, stay rooted in Christ, live boldly in truth, and let the cross shape everything. Peace be with you.